They're two happy women bringing you inspiring stories, politics, pop culture, and lifestyle hacks, all with an eye to making our communities and our country a better place to live. It's the Happy Women Podcast with your hosts, Jen Horn and Katie Gorka.
Thanks for joining us and welcome to another episode of the Happy Women Podcast. I'm Jennifer Horn.
And I'm Katie Gorka.
And as we record today, the new year underway, President Trump has been certified officially by Kamala Harris, of all things. A lot of Chardonnay was consumed, I'm sure, on that Monday evening by Kamala Harris. President Trump, the president-elect, holding a press conference on Tuesday talking about all kinds of things, including the weaponization of government. And Katie, this is something you know a lot about. Your husband going to work for the Trump administration. We have all seen the weaponization of government on display. And last episode, you were telling me about a book that you were just really stunned by. And so we're so happy to have the author of that book. Adam Levinger is here. He is the author of The Insider Threat: How the Deep State Undermines America from Within. He's a former senior director for strategic assessments for the U.S. National Security Council. And Adam, thank you so much. I told you this off the air, but truly, thank you so much for standing up, telling your story. I know this was a lot to endure, and we're just happy that you're here and telling us about it and helping to wake up the American people. So thanks for joining us.
Thanks for the opportunity.
So before we get started, why don't you give people kind of a little bit of background on you, how you ended up in the security sphere? Just lay the groundwork for us on how this all started for you.
I joined the Pentagon in 2004 as an appointee to the George W. Bush administration as a lawyer. And after several years, working in a legal capacity on Iraq and Afghanistan reconstruction, it became very clear to me that there was really no strategy to win those wars. And I was thinking to myself, well, I can do all the legal work, till the cows come home. But if there's no actual strategy to win these wars, all of it's for naught. And so in 2006, I was hired by the Office of Net Assessment, which was, I would call it the highest level strategy office in the Pentagon, to really focus on these wars and do net assessments and strategic assessments to ensure that we really had a direction that we could go to solve our objectives in these wars.
All right. So within the world of national security, the Office of Net Assessment is actually really legendary. But for people who are not inside DC or not inside the national security world, they may not get the clout that it has, the important role that it has. Just give us a little bit more background, as if you're talking to somebody who's never heard of this office. What made this office so special? And maybe say a few words about its longtime director, Andy Marshall.
Yeah. So the office, I think a good way of understanding it is to really go back and look at its history. Like, how did it come about? Why did it come about? And I think an easy way just to understand what is a net assessment, it's essentially what you do before national security strategy to get your national security strategy right. And what I mean by that is the office was really an outgrowth of America's failure during the Vietnam War to understand the strategic context of that war. A lot of Americans at the time, including the president and secretary of defense, saw this, the war in Vietnam is, this was like one of many sort of dominoes, falling to communism. And so this is a view that America had of that war. But the Vietnamese, the North Vietnamese, they didn't see it that way. They saw America as just another occupier, another foreign occupier of their country. We had taken over, of course, from the French, and that had been part of French Indochina. And so there was really, one of the tragedies of the war is that we were fighting two different wars. We were fighting one war thinking, one thing, and our adversary was thinking something else. And so the whole purpose of an Office of Net Assessment is to ensure that we never enter wars in the future without understanding the strategic context. What are the motivations of the various actors? And what is also America capable of doing? One of the important things about net assessment is really the word net. All power is relative. So, gross power, by itself in a vacuum is meaningless. It's like, how does American strengths and weaknesses, sort of how do we compare those to our adversaries, to our strategic competitors? And so it's the net sort of balance of capabilities as well as weaknesses which go into a net assessment.
Okay, so 2009, I think this will not come as a surprise to anybody. Obama comes into power, and it's a real turning point for the United States. And you all felt it particularly keenly in the Office of Net Assessment. So we start with the famous Cairo speech, June 4th, 2009. Obama kicks off with his famous apology tour, apologizing for the United States. And he really wanted to bring the United States down a few notches. So talk about this. This is really... Okay, we're gonna get into the whole conversation about the deep state, and this is a big conversation because at some point I think you also really need to look at what happened to Nixon, because I think Nixon got taken down by the deep state as well. You do refer to things that had happened earlier, but it was really Obama who mobilized, in many respects, the deep state initially to push through his kind of down with America policy. So talk about, from your perspective, what happens when Obama comes into office?
Yeah, so here I am in the highest level strategy office, starting in the year 2006. Obama wins the presidency in November 2008, and then he comes into office, and he's there for 2 terms. And I'm here in the highest level strategy office of the Pentagon watching the evolution of his defense strategy, national security strategy. What becomes very evident at the outset is that Obama had a vision that was highly unusual. I think it's unprecedented in American history. And he articulated that vision during what some people call his apology tour, where he goes around to Cairo, he goes to Europe, he actually goes all around the world, and he essentially apologizes for the conduct of American policy, foreign policy historically. And he makes this argument that there must be, more balance in the world. And America cannot be this, preeminent primary power, and that there must be some humility. And this is essentially the argument he makes in many foreign countries. One of the shocking things for me, and I think by some of my colleagues in the Office of Net Assessment, is that the whole purpose of the office is to ensure American primacy, is to ensure American preeminence. And that the reason why relates to our classified war plans, which is that, in the course of conducting war, America must, to succeed, reach what's called phase 3 dominance. We have to be able to dominate our adversary on the battlefield. And if America doesn't have the power to do that, we can't accomplish any of our war plans. And so it had always been just a matter of faith by American presidents and secretaries of defense. Of course we want to be dominant. Of course we want peace through strength to deter adversaries, potential adversaries, for even challenging America. And so he's going around making this argument to really cut American power down. That's very troubling for an office that's based upon the need for that power. The American people do not respond favorably to Obama's apology tour. You see this in the polling at the time. And in the book, I go and I address the polls. And, Americans believe in America, think we're an exceptional nation, and are proud of our constitutional order and all the values we stand for. We don't think we're just another country that should be balanced with others. We should have a leadership role in the world. And so at this point, coming to the deep state, what Obama very clearly does, and I watched this from inside the Pentagon, is he starts to change the bureaucracy. He starts to remove leaders who believe in American primacy, who believe in American preeminence, and install his own ideological operatives. So you mentioned my longtime boss, Andrew W. Marshall, a legendary defense strategist and my mentor. And this was a very frustrating time for him working in the Obama Pentagon. Twice Obama tried to, shut the office down because it represented what he didn't like. and Congress, put up a fight. But eventually, in 2015, he managed to remove Andy Marshall, again a legendary guy who had been in that office, both in Democratic administrations and Republican administrations, and he implanted somebody who would promote the Obama doctrine, which is to genuinely cut America's power down. In some respects, a real saboteur. And his name's James H. Baker. I name names in the book because I have the government evidence of what he did and what he said. And this guy, goes about really sabotaging American national security strategy.
I always just want to know people's motivation. And I guess the first question would be if you think that this was this an attempt at a coup? I mean, it seems like a serious word, but it was serious stuff that was happening within the government. And even just in the speeches that Obama would give, there was a very real change in how the American president viewed the place of America in the world order. Was this a coup, do you think?
So I think coup is actually maybe not the right word. Katie has a magnificent book on next generation Marxism where, she really lays out, along with Mike Gonzalez, how a worldview that sees America as an imperialist power, as a hegemonic power, as a oppressor, this has been growing up inside American institutions for many decades now. And a lot of what's behind this ideology that you see on Ivy League campuses in America to this day, these pro-Hamas protests, these anti-American protests, a lot of this is funded by America's enemies. And it's funded by the Chinese, it's funded by the Russians, it's funded by the Iranians, the Qataris. It's funded by them because they have learned, America's adversaries have learned a long time ago, particularly the searing lessons of the Second World War, being Germany and Japan, is that if you take America on head on, you will get destroyed. And the comparative advantage that the Russians or Chinese and Iranians have is that they really like to work indirectly. Their culture, their strategic culture is a culture of subversion and internal manipulation. America, of course, as we all know, is a very open society, which is one of our great strengths. But they've managed to insert themselves into our institutions so that they're now collaborating and funding, various academic programs. Lots of NGOs in Washington, D.C. and around the country get funded by America's enemies. And they're collaborating. This should be no surprise to any American at this point. They're collaborating with national security officials inside the Pentagon, inside our intelligence agencies. And it's a win-win situation for these government officials, these U.S. government officials, if you accept the notion that America is a bad country and must be torn down. It is inevitable that America's enemies will pick up on that and be like, these are my friends. I'm going to work with them to help them in this initiative.
Okay, I love that that's where you went with this, because that's what I wanted to turn to next. Because first of all, there's so much detail in your book. So I can't say strongly enough. I really feel like people have to read it. It is shocking. It is eye-opening. It is riveting. I have to say, I think one of the most really pivotal aspects of the book for me was the tie between the Russia hoax and the Office of Net Assessment, where I used to work. So I guess you were not necessarily the first person to break this, right? The role of Stephen Halper and General Trubnikov. I think that was known, right? Previously that ONA was contracting with them, but you go into a level of detail, which is really stunning. So for those who don't know, I mean, I love the fact that you characterize Stephen Halper as sort of the grandfather of presidential election interference, right? So there was an incident when Jimmy Carter was running where Stephen Halper turned out to be the man in charge of trying to get hold of Jimmy Carter's briefing materials for a debate, right? So how does this tie to the Russia hoax? What's the tie between Stephen Halper, a communist, right? A Russian collaborator, and his, I guess you would call him his partner in crime, General Trubnikov, former head of Russian foreign intelligence.
Yeah, so this is an angle when most Americans think of the Russia hoax or Russiagate, they think of this FBI operation. What I observed and experienced began really seeing the origins of the Russia hoax in the year 2010. And the argument I make in my book, in which I believe, is that if you're going to do something as audacious as this Russia hoax, sophisticated politicians like Hillary Clinton and bureaucratic operatives like Brennan and Comey and Clapper, all these guys, and Obama, of course, they do their homework and they put the institutional infrastructure in place ahead of time. And that's what I saw. So what did I see? Starting in the year 2010 and going for the next 6 years into 2016, every year the Office of Net Assessment was contracting with Stephen Halper, who is as you said yourself, Katie, the world's most infamous presidential election interference operative, to do these rather cockamamie studies. And on these studies, very importantly, he includes the former head of Russian intelligence, General Trubnikov. Why is this important? It's important because fast forward to Russiagate and Hillary Clinton's claim in 2016 that here you have, Trump, collaborating with the Russians. She is using information generated by Stephen Halper and by General Trubnikov. These are the sources for what became called the Steele dossier. Why is that so important? It's so important because if anybody ever asks her, why did you, Hillary Clinton, rely upon Stephen Halper and General Trubnikov for the information for the Steele dossier, she can say, oh, look, the Pentagon's highest level strategy office, the Office of Net Assessment, has been relying upon them for half a decade. And so why shouldn't I? And this is a sort of a subtle piece of tradecraft where it's like you create these insurance policies, and sophisticated deep state operatives in Washington, D.C., this is sort of their bread and butter. It's quite technical, of course, and it's complicated, but this is what they're constantly doing. They're creating blackmail material on others. They're generating these insurance policies, and a lot of it, when you look back on it, it doesn't make. I mean, it's kind of farcical, but it's enough. It passes the bare minimum sufficiency to give her the out that she's looking for, the plausible deniability that she's looking for. So this is what I observed, and I reported this at the time. It was ignored by the DoD Office Inspector General, and if it had been taken seriously, maybe we would not have had a Russiagate. But who knows?
All right. So we know that the deep state mobilized in a big way with the collusion of Hillary Clinton, with the collusion of Obama, to peddle this, now we know, absolutely fake story about President Trump. He gets elected anyway, right? Much to their chagrin. So they're going to keep working on ways to take him down. But the other thing that happens that I think is so interesting as well in your book is how this touches on General Mike Flynn, because Trump taps Mike Flynn to be his national security advisor. He in turn taps you to come in and do net assessments for him. Why do these guys go after Mike Flynn?
Yeah, no, that's a really critical thing to get clarity on. So Trump is an outsider, and there's something very refreshing and regenerative in the American constitutional order about our presidential election system, is that it does open up enough room for outsiders to come in and sort of cleanse our government of too much sort of calcified political corruption. One of the things that may not be fully appreciated by lots of Americans is that most American candidates, presidential candidates, typically come from within inside the government. They're congressmen or senators or governors or something. And if they don't have all the money in the world, they do have to make a lot of dirty deals to work their way up to even be a candidate for the presidency. And that's important because, what I call the deep state, which are sort of like these corrupt government officials, they get to generate blackmail material on presidential candidates as they come up. And so typically there's a pretty large blackmail file on most presidential candidates. Trump, on the other hand, comes in as an outsider. He's an ultimate outsider. He cannot be controlled by the vested interests in Washington. And he's scary. He's actually saying he's going to drain the swamp. And all these corrupt, criminal operatives inside our federal bureaucracy are like, well, he's going after me. And by himself, Trump was threatening. But when he started to bring in insiders, people who believed in his mission to drain the swamp, to inject more accountability into the U.S. government, to ensure that we had strategies to win our wars, to end our wars with honor, he started tapping, people like General Mike Flynn. And Mike Flynn tapped myself. We are insiders who know these dirty tricks, who know how the deep state operates. And here we are to empower an outsider, President Trump, to actually clean the system up. And Flynn was a supreme existential threat to the deep state, just because he was a 33-year Army intelligence operative. He knew these dirty tricks. Immediately, as soon as he was briefing in early January with Brennan and Comey and Clapper on the Steele dossier and the nonsense that was in that document and related documents, he immediately was sniffing, asking the right questions. Where are you getting these sources? Who are these sources? These guys freaked out because they knew that if anybody could get to the bottom of the Russia hoax, it was General Flynn. So he became an existential threat. It was a bureaucratic kill or be killed moment, and they went for the juggler, and they took him out. And, briefly me, I was walking across Lafayette Park one day. Actually, it was the day after Flynn was removed, and somebody was waiting for me. And they came up to me and said, Adam, now that General Flynn's gone, who's going to protect you from James Baker in the Office of Net Assessment? And then he walked away. So the deep state knows down to, my path to the White House in the morning where the threats are, and is really ruthlessly focused on removing anyone who threatens their corruption and their anti-American ideological subversion.
Talking to Michael Flynn and knowing what kind of guy he wasn't the kind of guy to shut up and go away like much of the swamp, right? To keep themselves alive and to keep going. He had already called out Obama. He was asking the right questions, as you mentioned. You're now caught up in that as well. Tell people what happened to you, because it wasn't just Michael Flynn that had the deep state breathing down their neck. It was you too, Adam.
Yeah. It's no secret. The world's unpredictable. One moment, everything's fine, and the next, the power's out and the cell towers are down. But with a satellite phone from sat123.com, you don't have to be cut off from the world. No matter where you are or what's happening, Sat123 keeps you connected. Whether you're deep in the mountains, on the road, or dealing with a natural disaster, your satellite phone will work when nothing else does. This is about being prepared. Sat123.com is family-owned, American-built, and focused on keeping you safe. They understand that in today's world, connection is more than convenience. It's essential. So here's the deal. Go to sat123.com and use code Katie for $25 off your first purchase. Don't get caught off guard. Stay connected. Stay prepared with Sat123.
Yeah, so I don't paint myself as a victim. I mean, in many respects, I see that what was done to me is a blessing, because I get to tell my story. I get to expose how horrific and corrupt and anti-American these deep state bureaucrats are. What I can tell you is that when Mike Flynn called over to the Pentagon and said, I want Adam Lovinger to be my senior director for strategic assessments, I really had two jobs he wanted me to do. One was to actually do net assessments so we could have net assessment informed strategies to win our wars. Because the office that I was working in, because it was filled with an Obama leadership at that point, that's the last thing he wanted. But the other thing he wanted me to do is help him drain the swamp, help him clean up this corruption. And so I had a spotless, 12-year-long career in the Office of the Secretary of Defense, in the Office of Net Assessment as part of that. Perfect performance ratings. I had won commendations and medals for my performance. Spotless career, no issues whatsoever. Within a couple months, I have 5 investigations against me. I have 2 administrative investigations, 3 criminal investigations, and what a lot of people need to. But what Americans should recognize is that these these investigations can be launched illegally. And they were launched against Flynn illegally. They were launched against Trump illegally. They were launched against me. They're really lawless processes, and they're designed to not investigate something, but to find dirt on somebody and, in some respects, just really, tie up their adversary in knots. Because when you're being investigated, it's like you can't do your job. And so the process itself becomes the weapon. So I had to deal with these 5 investigations against me.
I just can't believe what you've been through. I mean, I remember somehow we met each other very early on in the Trump administration, in the first Trump administration. And I so appreciated your perspective, your knowledge. And then boom, one day you were gone. And I didn't know what happened. I didn't know where you'd gone. I knew that the deep state had come down on you, but I have to say I was so appalled when I read your story and saw what you went through for almost all of 4 years, 6 years. I mean, it went on and on and on. And it's so commendable to me. I just think it's extraordinary that you can come out smiling and in good spirits, and also that you had the bravery to write the book and to tell the story. And not everybody comes out as well as you. And that's, I think, all the more reason to be really, to commend you for your bravery. So I think we just have a few minutes, but I think we have to try to get in the story of what happened to Stephen Luke, because this is a story that nobody knows. And I have to say, when I came to that part of your book, I was just stunned and so saddened. And I think this is, Jen and I often talk about the fact that the thing we most want to see on day one after Trump closes the border, but we want to see the J6 prisoners released. We want to see justice for this J6 prisoners. But I think the other person who really, really, really needs a kind of justice is Stephen Luke. So what happened there?
Yeah. So Stephen Luke he's now dead. He was murdered, and the murder was covered up as a suicide. And I'll give you a little bit of background of him. He was a veteran, an Air Force colonel, who then became a senior investigator in the U.S. Department of Defense Office Inspector General. And he was in a very sensitive division of that office, which was investigating senior leader misconduct. So that's investigating generals and admirals and senior bureaucrats. And he had been whistleblowing to Senator Grassley for about half a decade. And really, one of the essences of what he was complaining about was that his higher-ups, the senior leadership in the Office of Inspector General, they were doctoring these reports of investigation. And so they have the staff go out and they do the reports, and then they come back with one determination, and they say, well, we don't like that determination. We have to change that determination. And so this is real serious corruption, and nothing was happening about it. And Stephen Luke was a very determined guy. And he was like, I'm not going to put up with this. I'm going to, keep fighting until there's some accountability here, because Americans get sent overseas, and if there's all this corruption, we're not going to win our wars. Young Americans are going to die. This is a horrendous state of affairs. And so he did not back down, and he kept going. And one day he took the elevator down from his office in the Mark Center, which is in Northern Virginia, crossed over a little bridge, went into a dark parking garage, and was found dead inside the trunk of his car. Now, in a very horrific and cynical way, This was, first of all, it was determined by the Alexandria Police Department that this was a homicide. But the DODIG covered that up and strong-armed Alexandria Police Department to not release that. And then they did what's called a do-over investigation. And that is we don't like the first investigation, let's bury that, and let's only focus, let's make the scope of the investigation only determine that it was a suicide. And sure enough, when you do that, you get the results you're after. And so it's been covered up to this day as a suicide. This poor man's family was informed it was a suicide. I reached out to them before the publication of the book, sent the information that I had on this. Of course, this is a very serious thing. I'll tell you, because I'm a lawyer by background, the evidence and making sure that I authenticated this report that determined that Stephen Luke was the victim of homicide. I went to the Alexandria Police Department. They confirmed that it was authentic. And to this day, it's been covered up. I've heard nobody talking about investigating this. Congress must get on this. And so does the Department of Justice. The big picture here is that it's clear to me that inspectors general are cover-up operations. They have been taken over by the deep state. The founders of this country knew you cannot check and balance yourself. Executive branch, the inspectors general are executive branch creatures, and it's an unsustainable situation. Various offices that I encountered, including the DoD Inspector General, including the United States Office of Special Counsel, these functions, in order to be true to our Constitution, must be dismantled and transferred to Congress. That's where the checking and balancing of the executive branch must exist. It is a farce. And of course, it's a tragedy, Stephen Luke's murder, but we have to ensure for his memory's sake that this sort of structural disaster does not get perpetuated, and that there's this recognition that these IGs are hopelessly corrupt, structurally flawed.
Because of you and because of General Michael Flynn and the story you just told, and I would say Steve Bannon and Peter Navarro and President Trump himself, the American people, I think, are more awake than they've ever been at the weaponization of our government. And I guess I would ask you, Adam, whether or not you have hope that this deep state can be curtailed, that we can restore transparency, that we can have some honesty and integrity back in the government, because people are losing faith by the minute. And I think that is actually President Trump's big job. And I don't think it's going to be the easiest job, because that swamp wants to stay alive. Those swamp creatures will fight to stay alive, as we've seen them. So are you hopeful? Do you think that there is a way to transform our government back into what the American people want it to be? Can President Trump do it? What would be some words of wisdom that you have for him, knowing where some of those, and I hate to use the word, the pun, but where the bodies are buried? That. What does he need to understand, and can it be done?
Yeah. So I in a short answer, yes, I do have hope. And I have hope because we have to have hope. We have children. We believe in this country. Our forebears, fought to preserve our liberties in this republic. And it's a glorious republic, and it's the best country in the world. And we've got nowhere else to go. And we have to fight to preserve these freedoms that we have and to keep these freedoms. So I do have hope. I believe my hope is actually also strengthened by Trump's agenda. I'm very pleased. I mean, he has this 10-point plan to dismantle the deep state and return power to the American people. And one of those is to ensure that the inspectors general are independent and objective. And whatever that means, I mean, I think I know what it means. But I'm encouraged by his vision. My word of, maybe it's a word of wisdom, but what I would encourage President Trump to keep in mind is that his staff, when they go into the administration, are going to be under tremendous pressure to sell out President Trump's vision and to sell out his mandate given to him by the American people, and to cut deals with the deep state. And these are murderous people. These are murderous bureaucrats. They kill people like Stephen Luke. They're generating blackmail files as we speak right now on all of Trump's incoming officials. There's going to be a lot of blackmail. There's going to be a lot of coercion, and we have to stand strong. It has, and encouragement has to come from the top. So President Trump needs to keep his staff protected by the deep state. I mean, this is a critical thing that unfortunately did not happen in the first Trump administration, was there was just not a recognition of how bad this was. And so a lot of his most capable staff, like General Flynn, were removed, and their reputations were smeared, and that was it. It's very hard to just grow. You can't grow a General Flynn overnight. These are critical, precious people who have critical, precious knowledge. You have to protect your people. That is I would say, the most important thing I would tell the incoming president.
Adam, thank you so much for writing the book, for not giving up hope, for not falling out of love with our great country. I hope you come back in. I hope you come back into the administration, help clean up the deep state. But the book alone is just such a contribution to the future of the freedom of our country. So thank you. I commend the book to everybody. The Insider Threat: How the Deep State Undermines America from Within. It is a real page turner. I read it in 2 sittings. So thank you. Thank you for all you've done.
My pleasure.
Absolutely. Get the book right now. You can get it on Amazon, Encounter Books as well. The Insider Threat: How the Deep State Undermines America from Within. Again, The Insider Threat is the name. The author, Adam Levinger. Adam, thanks so much again for being a true patriot, as Katie said, and for writing this book and for spending some time with us. We appreciate you.
Thank you.
And thank you all for joining us. Don't forget to get Katie's book as well. You heard Adam reference that, Next Gen Marxism, available on Amazon, wherever you get your books, or you can connect with her at katiegorka.org. You can find her on Facebook and Facebook by searching Catherine Gorka, on X at Gorka Katie. You can find me on social media as well, Jennifer Horn Radio on Facebook and Instagram, and at Jennifer Horn on X and on Truth Social. Please keep up those 5-star reviews. Share Happy Women with your friends. It really does make a difference. We appreciate every single one of you. And you can connect with us on all our platforms at SalemPodcastNetwork.com. Thanks for joining us. It's another episode of the Happy Women Podcast.